waited at least to hit a half century, the participation number. And more than 100 have registered. I hope people are joining. Good evening, everyone. I am Saraswati, Secretary General of the Madras Chamber of Commerce, and I'm happy to welcome you all for this 8th talk series, Sustainability Speaks talk series, 8th number on very interesting subject, green hydrogen. And just to give an introduction about the chamber, we are 187-year-old chamber, the oldest, and we have many initiatives. And one of the very important step we took during our 175th year is the establishment of the Sustainable Chennai Forum to create a business case for sustainability. And we decided we will look at areas like energy, water, waste management, urban greening, things like that, transport, things like that. And under that, we have a lot of activities going on currently, and we are also having our Urban Thinkers Campus every year. And for 2023, it's happening on December 15th and 16th. One of the other important activities which we started is this knowledge series, Sustainability Speaks. And we have had a number of subjects discussed. And today we are here to discuss another important subject, which we had a hint of it during our last Urban Thinkers Campus. Mr. Venkat will remember. So we wanted to see and wanted to understand more from Mr. Sundararajan about the green hydrogen and what the opportunities and challenges. In fact, this program should have happened a little earlier. And Mr. Sundararajan was traveling and we were waiting for a green signal from him to have this again organized. So today we are here, and thanks everyone for joining. I request Mr. Venkachalam to say a few words, kickstart the discussion, and introduce Mr. Sundararajan also. And let me request all of you to put your audio and video on silent mode, and your questions can be posted in the chat box as he is presenting. And maybe at the end, we can raise your hand, and if you can probably ask the questions directly, depending on the time and the number of questions received. I'll stop here, leave to Mr. Venkat. And Mr. Shivaraman is here. Thanks for joining. He's our past president, and he was the founder member of the Sustainable Chennai Forum, which I just now mentioned. Thank you, sir, for joining.
A very good evening to all. In fact, it's a great pleasure to welcome Sundararajan for this talk on green hydrogen. In fact, hydrogen and helium are the most abundant elements in the universe, and we here are struggling to extract it at an optimal cost. Now, just to introduce Mr. Sundararajan, he retired as Managing Director of Bharat Oman Refineries Limited, a joint venture between BPCL and Oman Oil Company, and it's now merged with BPCL and been in the news for all the good reasons. And before that, he held very senior positions at BPCL, that's Bharat Petroleum Mumbai. And he's also responsible for the commissioning of the JV refinery earlier. After his retirement, he's had the opportunity to evaluate various options for decarbonizing the economy as mandated by the government of UK, and in the process of and he has understood the role of and challenges in producing green hydrogen or a blue-green hydrogen to meet the goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050 or 2070, as India has put it. So he's presently an advisor, special projects in SR Oil's UK Global Capability Center in India. He's basically a chemical engineer from IIT Kanpur with a vast experience in the Indian oil industry. And it's given him in-depth knowledge of refining, technical troubleshooting, project formulation and implementation, and understanding the challenges and developing insights into the future of the industry. I've known him for more than about 46 years. We were actually wingmates, roommates, etc. in IIT Kanpur. And I know he's extremely sincere, extremely dedicated. So he's not just a refineries man, he's a highly refined man. Thank you, and over to Sundar.
Thank you, Mr. Venkachalam, for the kind introduction. My subject is green hydrogen, opportunities and challenges. And before I go through the presentation, I would like to thank the Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industry for giving me this opportunity to speak on this subject. The time given to me is about 1 hour, and I'll try to be within that 1 hour. There are 30 slides, and I think the slide number is written, so you need not get impatient if it's going beyond some time. I'm sure it's an evening time, people would like to go home, but I will try to complete it as within the time. So I move to the next slide. Yeah. So these are the topics that I'm covering. I hope somebody can tell me if it's okay. You're able to see the next slide so that I'm confident. Yeah, okay. So I'm moving.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. I am covering the following topics. So before I go to the green hydrogen, I think that the topics number 2, 3, 4 are concerning green hydrogen, but I thought it's imperative that we talk something about CO2 and climate change that is actually driving green hydrogen. So I thought I will talk about CO2 and green climate change, then about hydrogen, what are the supply, demand, and how much is the hydrogen classification, how it is done, and what are the enablers, how GH2, that is green hydrogen, is an enabler, and what are the end users of green hydrogen. Then we come to the main topics of how green hydrogen is produced. A little technical, but I'll not be so technical here, and try to give you an overall perspective of why it is so expensive and what are the challenges. And finally, green hydrogen growth and cost forecast, present supply demand, and the potential to facilitate meeting net zero. What are the challenges and how we are racing against time in this decarbonization exercise that the whole world is doing. So this, there are two graphs on this slide. All of us are aware that the effects of climate change are becoming prominent in the form of changing weather patterns like severe storms or droughts or heavy deluge of rain and increasing global temperatures. All of us have experienced this. Global emissions of carbon dioxide are about 40 gigatons today, gigatons per year. Emissions of carbon dioxide have risen significantly since 1970s. You can see in the graph, though the rate of growth has slowed in the recent years. The concentration of CO2, as shown in the adjoining chart, indicates the steep rise in CO2 concentration from about 320 ppm in the 1960s to about 420 ppm in 2020s, in the last 60 years. It seems people who have calculated this before, the concentration was only about 250 to 270 ppm before the industrial era, that is around 1850s. Economies across the globe are striving to reduce their carbon emissions and mitigate the ill effects of climate change. A growing consensus around the need for green transition has helped galvanize actions designed to reduce carbon emissions. To stabilize the climate and limit physical climate risks, it is necessary to reduce the addition of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere to net zero and limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, to reduce the odds of initiating the hazards and the irreversible effects of climate change. It is estimated that restricting all future net carbon dioxide emissions to about 500 gigatons, combined with substantial decreases in emission of other greenhouse gas emissions like methane, nitric oxide, would result in about 60% probability of limiting warming to about 1.5 degrees centigrade. However, at current emission rates, the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming would thus likely to be exceeded within the next decade. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. I think it's taking a little time for the next slide to come. Okay. Now this slide talks about the global CO2 emissions. As I mentioned, emission is about 40 billion tons per year, which is the same as 40 gigatons per year. Now, if you look at the application-wise, power contributes maximum amount of emissions, about 42%, and industry about 26%, transport 23%, building 9%. If you look at region-wise, China is the highest contributor of 34%, USA is second at 13%, and India happens to be third at 7%. Rest of the world contributing about 35%. if you look at the energy source wise emissions, coal is the maximum, contributing about 42%, oil about 29%, gas 21%. So this is what we find in the global CO2 emissions. Now, if you go to India emissions, it is following the same pattern. Coal is about 44%, oil is about 25%, and natural gas is about 6%. And India, and if you look at what are the sources, you said electricity is 46%, that is coming from coal. Industry is about 30%, and transport is about 13%, building 7%. As I mentioned earlier, India is the third largest emitter after China and US. And in line with global trends, India is committed to meet the net zero target by 2070. It has an intermediate target to reach about 50% of the total cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel-based energy resources by 2030. The carbon intensity of India's power sector. The carbon intensity of India's power sector is estimated to be 725 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, compared to the global average of 510, which is predominantly because it is coal-based, and this is a real issue for us. Now, this chart shows energy coming out of power. You can see here, power contributes about 13 to 14 gigatons, or about 40%. Industry contributes 9%, transport contributes about 8.5%, and buildings are very small amount. And under each of these, this is given for various years, and you will see that it is almost similar or increasing in some particular aspects. The subsector share of systems emissions is given here. I mean, it's just for information. That's not going to talk about it much. Now, this slide is a fully loaded slide, so I'll have to take a little time on this slide. This chart on the left-hand side shows the sources of energy. You can see on the top line, oil 31%, natural gas 17%, coal 35%, and non-energy 17%. So 31% and emissions in billion tons is given at the bottom. You can look at this, and that's total of about 40 gigatons. Now, out of 40 gigatons, 31% is contributed by oil, 17% by natural gas, 35% by coal, and non-energy sources about 17%. Now, you'll find in the square chart, there are 3 or 4 or 5 different colors. The black being the power. You can see on the left-hand side where my cursor is there, that's power. And there are oil is producing power also, but it's a much smaller contribution. Natural gas also produces some power. Coal is also producing some power. So you will see that the power generation, the total from this chart, the observation from this chart is that the emission from power generation and industries, the black is power and the dark gray is industries, and this dark blue or light gray you can call, that is transportation, that is road transport, aviation, other things put together. And the light blue and all, you can see it's quite small, so we'll ignore it for this presentation. So looking at these 3 things, you'll find that power generation and industry, that is the black and dark gray, this whole thing is contributing 35% through oil, 75% through natural gas, and almost 95% through coal. Whereas oil, that is predominantly diesel, I'm talking of that light gray one, which is predominantly diesel, aviation fuel, and gasoline, contributes about 60% of CO2 emissions through road transport. On the left, I have given in green color the small text boxes. It shows how much is CO2, nitric oxide, and methane, which are the 3 greenhouse gas emissions from each of these sectors. That is power, how much 33 and dash, and industry is producing 30% CO2, 8% nitric oxide, 33% methane. So these are the things that are mentioned here. So you'll find that this chart gives you overall a perspective of which fuel is contributing to CO2 and to which application. Now, if you go to the chart on the right side, this is a quadrant matrix, where on the top it is hydrogen technology applicable, and which is saying yes or no, whether hydrogen technology can be applied, yes or no. And on the left side, you'll find whether direct electrification is applicable, yes or no. So it's very clear from this that where electrification is not applicable, okay, and where hydrogen is applicable, you'll find the green, the bottom quadrant, hydrogen dominance. So this is where hydrogen will dominate, and this is the long haul heavy transport, shipping, all the industries, everything will go through this. Obviously, the right quadrants we can't go because hydrogen technology is not applicable to these things. Now, coming to where both are applicable and it can compete with each other. So here competition is possible, and here light duty road transport, buildings, heat, low temperature, all those things, green energy can help. Now, if you look at, now coming back to the left chart, you can see all the black portion, you can have only renewable energy. Green hydrogen can't do anything for this black portion, which is the power. Whereas industry, it's clearly hydrogen is going to win. And in the mobility sector, both electrification and hydrogen can help. So this is the overall learning from this particular slide. And I hope you can appreciate there's a big scope for hydrogen to help in carbon abating. The next slide, I am talking about the same two possibilities of reducing carbon, that is renewable power, clean hydrogen, battery energy storage, and carbon sequestration. So renewable power, this technology dominates the low-cost decarbonization spectrum and can support a number of sectors that require electrification and is critical for the production of green hydrogen. That's very important. Without renewable power, you cannot produce green hydrogen. It is the first transformational clean technology that attracted the interest of investors, corporates, and regulators, given its critical importance. So the solar power and wind power, all these things started increasing considerably because of the importance given to this. It has the potential to support the decarbonization of approximately 50% of all human released greenhouse gas emissions. While the renewable power remains the most commercial scalable technology, that currently occupies the low end of the cost curve, this alone cannot decarbonize more than 50% of the emissions. So let's go to the clean hydrogen then. This is also a transformational technology for long-term energy storage, enabling an increasing uptake of renewables in power generation and aiding the decarbonization of very difficult to meet sectors like iron and steel, long-haul transport, and so on and so forth. It is estimated that clean hydrogen can help in about 15% of greenhouse gas emissions and about 20% of carbon dioxide emissions, and will be one of the key pillars in this energy mix in future. Battery. This will help in decarbonization of road transport through electrification for mostly light vehicles and other smaller things that can be done. And the last is carbon sequestration. And carbon sequestration is also a clean hydrogen, but it is called blue. I'll come to that later. And this is vital for industrial subsectors where hydrogen is being produced today from natural gas, and you cannot change over to anything else at this point of time. And that carbon capture is a very important aspect of overall carbon abatement. So with this, I'm coming to the end of the first one to give you a general idea of how climate change is going to affect us. And therefore, green hydrogen is one of the important aspects and key pillar to move forward. So let me go to the second topic that I mentioned, hydrogen. I'm sure all of you know what is hydrogen. There's nothing. It is one of the lightest and most abundant element. Its role in the energy ecosystem is not new, and it has a long history in transport and industrial applications. And it is used for making different chemicals like ammonia, methanol. It's used in refineries, petrochemicals, and so on. And looking at the chemical itself, I'm sure you know that. I will not go into that. And it is the most abundant chemical element, constituting roughly about 75% of normal matter. As such, the important thing to understand here is that hydrogen requires energy processes to be produced in that form, because it is not available freely for you as hydrogen like you get coal or petroleum, oil, and so on. So it is not considered as an energy source, but an energy vector. You have to spend some energy to make hydrogen useful as energy. So this is a short introduction to hydrogen. Now there are certain classifications of hydrogen. Now hydrogen has a number of valuable attributes, two of which make it unique for abating climate change: its ability to be stored and used as a clean fuel without direct emissions of greenhouse gas emissions or any other pollutant, the wide variety of clean production pathways that could be adopted in its production, offering flexibility along supply chains. There are 6 well-defined colors in terms of technology: brown, gray, turquoise, pink, blue, and green hydrogen. So if you look at this slide, so it's all the color of this hydrogen, or the hydrogen is always colorless, but it is categorized this way. The coal is, if the source is coal and you do process as coal gasification, then it becomes black or brown hydrogen. If you use natural gas and you use steam methane reforming or an autothermal reactor, then it's called gray hydrogen, because in both these things, I'll come to the next one, methane is the source and pyrolysis is the process. Then you make turquoise hydrogen. It's called turquoise hydrogen. In all these cases, CO2 is produced, and the CO2 is left out in the air. It is emitted out. And therefore, they are not anyway close to blue or green hydrogen. Coming to the pink hydrogen, you use nuclear power and you use electrolysis. So obviously, since you're using electrolysis, there is no CO2 produced, and therefore it is pink hydrogen. But this is not supposed to be really a very useful one at this stage. The blue hydrogen is where you have natural gas, just like the second one, gray hydrogen. But then you're using carbon capture process, where you're capturing about 90 to 95% of the carbon. Carbon means I'm talking of carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide, once it's captured, that hydrogen is considered as blue. Now, when you use renewable electricity and you use electrolysis, that becomes green hydrogen. So this is a general classification of all the various types of processes and source. Now I will talk of why do we choose whatever we are choosing here? Why do we use the particular type of hydrogen? So it's classified into energy and carbon dioxide intensity. So raw material, I had already mentioned in the previous slide. I'm not going into that. The next row, which is energy, you'll see that the feed plus fuel and how much electricity is used. So feed plus fuel is one number here, and electricity is the other number. You'll see that the coal gasification requires 57, and this requires 45, turquoise requires 40. So if you see that, all the 3 or 4 of them require the similar amount of feed plus fuel, except pink and green, because you're not using feed and fuel, using electricity directly there. The total number, if you add feed plus fuel plus electricity in terms of kilowatt hour per kg of hydrogen produced, it is nothing very dramatically different from one another. However, if you go to the next row, the carbon dioxide intensity, that is the kgs of carbon dioxide that is produced from production of 1 kg of hydrogen, it varies quite a bit. Pink is very less. Blue hydrogen is slightly lesser than the other things, but slightly higher than both pink and green. And obviously, green wins the race as far as this is concerned in terms of CO2. So that's how green becomes very important, because we want to avoid CO2 generation. I'm going to the next slide, global emission reduction, which green hydrogen can enable. Now, these are some of these industries or classifications of various sectors. And you can see here that about 32 kgs of CO2 can be reduced if you replace the present, whatever you're using, coal or natural gas, with hydrogen. So 32 kgs can be reduced per kg of hydrogen, Shipping can reduce about 14 kgs if you use hydrogen per 1 kg of hydrogen, and so on and so forth. So if you want to replace natural gas, it can reduce about 7 kg of CO2 if you replace with hydrogen. And obviously, you will ask how much of hydrogen will be required to replace whatever fuel is being used in each of these. So it's very difficult to tell because of various things that are being used. But in general, I can say the calorific value of hydrogen is about 2.5 times more than natural gas or oil. Sorry, it's Now, what are the end uses of clean hydrogen? So as far as industry, we already mentioned in chemicals, I can use directly as methanol. In fertilizers, it can be used as ammonia. In iron and steel, instead in the blast furnace, you use a lot of coke. If you use hydrogen, a lot of carbon dioxide is reduced. And among all the industries, iron and steel is the predominant industry where it can reduce carbon dioxide significantly. And then heating here. Buildings, it can be used. In power, you can actually use liquid ammonia and use as hydrogen. So that's something that can be used as transportation. You can transport hydrogen as ammonia or methanol also. So it has the flexibility of energy storage and flexibility of transportation. And in the heavy road industry, heavy road transportation, hydrogen can be used. In shipping, as I said, hydrogen can be transported in the form of ammonia or methanol, and that can be used. And the CO2 that is produced from blue hydrogen, that can be converted into a sustainable aviation fuel, and that can also be part of replacing the jet fuel that is presently being used in the airlines. So this is what overall understanding of what hydrogen is. But now I'm going to a little more detail about hydrogen and how it is produced. The third section of my topic. Let me look at the time. 5 o'clock. So there are 3 major process routes. I'm just not going into the details of all these things. Where you can produce gray and blue hydrogen, I mentioned normally it is produced through natural gas. Pardon? Anything?
Very good evening. உங்களுக்கு நான் ஃபோன் பண்ணணும்னு நினைச்சிருக்கேன் டெய்லி.
Sorry. Yeah, so I can continue. So as part of reforming SMR 8. Hello, anything you want?
No, you can continue, sir.
I'm sorry. Yeah, okay.
Somebody probably is interfering. Yeah, we will mute them.
Okay. So as part of reforming SMR ATR, you can produce gray hydrogen or blue hydrogen. I mentioned SMR produces steam methane reforming, produces hydrogen, but the CO2 is let out. But in case of ATR, and if you have other facilities, you can produce blue hydrogen, where the hydrogen is, where the carbon dioxide is captured. So carbon capture and storage will be essential if this method is to be used to produce low carbon hydrogen. Now coming to electrolysis with renewable power. This renewable energy power is a very important statement which is coming next to the electrolysis. And this can be produced through pink and green hydrogen. So this is done through separation in an electrolysis cell. You put water and you can produce hydrogen and oxygen. We have done this experiment in the school. It produces pure hydrogen, which is ideal for fuel electric cells, has high efficiency, great potential to be scaled up and used as a way of converting excess electrical energy produced by renewables into hydrogen, which enables energy storage flexibility. So whenever thermal power plants are, renewable energy can't produce power, you can use this hydrogen in the thermal power plants and produce power during those periods. I will not go into this biological and solar fuels and all as far as, because there's not too much concern with our topic. Now, when you talk of electrolyzers, I'm giving a very simple flow sheet here. The electrolyzers is this part of, is what is mentioned, and this is what the research is going on this aspect of electrolyzer. So if I quickly want to go through this, you'll see that water is coming through some system. It goes in joins along with some electrolyte. It goes into the electrolyzer. You have this power system available, which gives good voltage, high voltage to this electrolyzer, to the both at cathode and anode, and you have oxygen produced from one thing, and cathode another end you are having hydrogen produced. The oxygen is left out, And what we are interested is in this hydrogen which is coming out. It goes through various processes, separator, and then finally it goes through a compressor, and through the compressor it can go to the process. So this is all, this aspect is all normal process engineering, chemical engineering, whatever you can call. And this is part of electrical. The main research is in this electrolysis process. So this is a very simple, please remember this. We are going to talk of only this electrolysis process. All these are all well established. It's not a big problem. Now, there are 4 types of electrolyzers. Alkaline electrolyzers, the most widely adopted electrolyzers. And this is a mature technology. I will sort of summarize this in the next 2 or 3 slides, but I don't want to go through this. There are some diagrams mentioned here. I think this audience does not require too much of mentioning. I will just go through the topic. The second one is proton exchange membrane. These are different type of electrolyzers, the solid polymer electrolyzers. They have some problems with durability at this point of time and a limited lifetime. The third is anion exchange membrane electrolyzers. They are still not commercially very available now. And they also face issues like limited membrane conductivity and potential formation of chlorine gas. And SOEC, that is solid oxide electrolyzer fuel cell electrolyzers, are still in a very nascent stage. So if you compare these electrolyzers, you'll find, one second. So if you find that the alkaline electrolyzers have some lifetime of 60,000 hours, and the capex is the lowest at this point. Capex I'm talking of dollars per kilowatt hour. Dollars per kilowatt for a system which is having greater than 1 megawatt of power production. So you can find this is very low, and these things are very, very far away. But it seems the research shows that in future, things may, there's a wide gap between these 4 types of electrolyzers, but in future, it can all come very close, and maybe AEM and PEM can become very competitive to alkaline electrolyzers. So to summarize whatever I've told so far, the alkaline electrolyzers, the chart on the left side where the black circle is there. So it shows how the technology is mature here. It's much better than, say, PEM or SOEC or AEM, because it's almost more than 200-300 degrees covered here, whereas here it is less. And if you see alkaline electrolyzers, the technology readiness level, which is one of the important parameters by which you check whether technology can be commercially moved further. So that number is greater than 9, which is good, which is a mature technology, and it is predominantly used in chloroalkali industries as of today also. PM electrolyzers also are commercially available, but not very frequent everywhere. And this TRL level is about 8 to 9, and it can be, it requires some amount of policy support to move further. SOEC electrolyzers, it's quickly approaching commercialization. Technology is commercially available, but the TRL level, which is technology readiness level, is about less than 7. And AEM electrolyzers are at earlier stages of development. And therefore, it is at a very small scale. You cannot go more than 50 kilowatt or something like that, which is not commercially possible. This is a hydrogen technology maturity curve. Now, if you see, initially you do a lab work, then you do a bench scale, then you do a pilot scale, then you do a large and commercial scale projects and ongoing optimization, and then widely deployed commercial scale. So this is the cycle how any technology goes through. And if you start from the right side, you'll find that natural gas SMR, coal gasification, chloroalkalis are all widely deployed today. And that's how we are emitting so much of carbon dioxide. So alkaline electrolysis is very close to widely deployed commercial scale, but a lot of research and a lot of improvement need to be done. PM is just lagging behind. And natural gas SMR, which is US, is also moving further. All the other technologies, although it's being mentioned in various literatures and other things, but it is still less than the pilot scale as of today. Now, coming to the next slide, electrolyzers, breakup of cost. See, the main cost driver for green hydrogen is electricity, which is about 73%. The cost of production of green hydrogen is today itself about 2 to 3 times more than the gray hydrogen and is not competitive today. This is mainly due to very high requirement of power for the electrolysis. Theoretically, about 39 kilowatt hour of electricity is required to produce about 1 kg of hydrogen. And this is just hydrogen at atmospheric pressure. So obviously you need to clean it, you have to do purification, you require to compress it. All that require much more hydrogen, much more power requirement. Hence, power cost reduction is absolutely necessary to increase penetration of green hydrogen. So you see the 73% is a big portion of the pie. The capex, although it looks 14% here, the absolute cost today for a 10 megawatt electrolyzer is more than $600 per kilowatt, which amounts to more than $6 million for a 10 megawatt electrolyzer. This is very expensive as of today. So we need to scale up this cell stacks so that we can, on the right side, if you see, there's a chart here which says if you make a 10 megawatt, I mentioned a figure of $600 per kilowatt hour. Whereas if you can make it into 100 megawatt, it may come down to about $450 per kilowatt hour. So the higher the size, you can make it less. The cost can come down. So that's what, and that's what the electrolyzer technology improvements are taking place to increase the scale and the scale of production of 100 megawatt. And also, if more and more industries start adopting it, the cost will come down on its own. So now we go to the next portion of my presentation. How is the hydrogen supply and demand today? So majority of the hydrogen that is produced using fossil fuels. And today, the world produces about 90 million tons. It is not metric tons here. It is 90 million tons of hydrogen is being produced. And almost all of them is coming through coal gasification, and then oil and natural gas. Natural gas is the green one, oil is the blue one, and coal gasification is the red one. And renewables constitute only 4%. So today we are emitting huge amount of carbon dioxide in the process of producing hydrogen. And where is it used? It is used, 41% is used in the refinery, 38% in ammonia, in the production of ammonia, methanol 15%, iron and steel 6%. So this is how it is presently used. Yeah, the next slide is greenhouse. GH2 is green hydrogen production dependent on renewable energy power. Now, green hydrogen, as I mentioned earlier, requires renewable energy for its production. And at the same time, the energy storage capabilities, including the seasonal variations and daytime, nighttime variation offered by green hydrogen, would enable the large uptake of renewables in the global power system. And hence, these two are interlinked. That is renewable energy and green hydrogen. The reduction in the levelized cost of electricity observed over the past decade is a key enabler of the emergence of clean hydrogen economy. You see a big reduction in these things, which has happened in the recent past. Solar photovoltaic cells have dropped by about 80% since 2010, and wind has also reduced by about 60%. Now, this was driven by both ongoing operational cost reduction from economies of scale and a reduction in the cost of capital for these clean energy developments by policy changes by the government, contributing to considerable cost reduction since 2010. On the right-hand side chart, this is a chart where the dotted line is there, that is as of today you can consider, and how various fuels are going to contribute to the power production. You can see here, coal, natural gas, and all those things, coal, petroleum, liquid, natural gas, and all those things are going to reduce after about, maybe after 2025-26, you see it's going to reduce dramatically. What is going to increase is yellow, that is solar, onshore wind, offshore wind, and then rest of the things that is going to increase all these things are going to contribute good amount of power in future by 2050. So this particular, to achieve net zero by 2070 and decarbonize grid operations, about 2,000 gigawatt of power, renewable power, wind and solar, and another 1,000 gigawatt of renewable power for the production of green hydrogen is required. So this is a huge challenge. An accelerated pace of capacity deployment is very critical to achieve energy transition and net zero. So the share of electricity in the final energy mix, which is here, is going to increase from 18% to 50% by about 2050. Now, how green hydrogen is going to help? And this is just a little forecast on how much of hydrogen is required here. So as I mentioned earlier, this left side chart is similar. It says that you can use in fuel cell electric vehicles and aviation, marine, rail, decarbonizing industry, which is iron and steel, petrochemicals, which I mentioned earlier, feedstock using captured carbon, I had mentioned, and then building. So these are the things where green hydrogen can be used. And if you look at the right-hand side chart, I tried to find out how much global emissions it can reduce in this column, overall how much it can reduce, and estimated global green hydrogen requirement in 2050. So that amounts to 360 million tons. If you recall, I had mentioned the present global hydrogen requirement is about 90 million tons, which has to increase to 360 million tons, which is a big ask. Okay. Now, in this slide, what is the potential growth? Now, these are three scenarios which have been built up by some consultants. I just put this picture here. Now, this is a very bull scenario, a very optimistic scenario, where green hydrogen is increasing by 6 to 7 times. That is, if you have to meet the target by 2050 of 1.5 degrees centigrade, limited to 1.5 degrees centigrade global warming by 2050, we need to increase hydrogen by about 6 to 7 times from the present scenario. And in a very pessimistic case on the right-hand side, it has to at least multiply by 2 times. Even then, the temperatures will go up by 2 degrees centigrade by 2070. So something which is possibly doable is the base case scenario, which is 2060, and limiting the temperature to by 2 degrees centigrade. So we need to increase it by 4 times, that is 90 to 360. That's what this says. And this graph, if you see how it is going to increase, refining, where all the consumptions are going to increase, where all the consumptions are going to reduce. So this is a very detailed chart, but it is good to understand that you need to at least 4 times more hydrogen, green hydrogen, that is required. Now, what are the advantages of green hydrogen? It doesn't produce any emissions. It produces only water. It is flexible to use, which I mentioned earlier. It can be converted to energy carriers like methanol, ammonia, and synthetic liquids. Can serve as an energy source for industrial applications in iron and steel, in refining, and so many other things. It can be used in the existing natural gas for heating. So you don't have to convert all the natural gas into hydrogen lines. You can inject some amount of hydrogen inside the natural gas to reduce the CO2 footprint. And unlike blue hydrogen, green hydrogen prices have no direct correlation with natural gas, providing the protection against volatility, which is generally observed all over the world. So to meet the net target of less than 2 degrees in temperature given by 260, the renewable energy power has to increase by 50 gigawatt per year. It's a big ask, as I mentioned. Okay. This is the green hydrogen forecast, cost forecast. Now, it's a little complicated. I have tried to summarize it in the next slide, but it's good to understand a little of this. You see the red and the yellow ones. It is basically considering 2 scenarios. One is electrolyzer cost in 2020 at $1,000 per kilowatt. And the second optimistic case of $650 per kilowatt, which I mentioned about $600 per kilowatt is around that. And in the second case, where it's a green one, there are 2 different things. you see electrolyzer cost in 2050 is 307 and electrolyzer cost in 2050 is about 130 in this case. So this remains same. And the red and the green ones are where the electricity price is 65 megawatt US dollar 65 per megawatt hour, and the green is $20 per megawatt hour. So these are the assumptions that have been made. And you will find that if this is the case, the prices will come down dramatically. And if electricity prices reduce to $20 per megawatt hour, which is presently 65. So you'll find that the green hydrogen price will be competitive with the present hydrogen produced from fossil fuels. That's what it is showing here. I'll go to the next slide and I'll explain to you. Yeah. So here you will see the green hydrogen cost and what other. So this is the electrolyzer hydrogen produced from the electrolyzer cost, which is about $4 to $10 and average being about $6.5 per kg. Whereas the green hydrogen are $2 to $3 after carbon emissions are reduced or if it is captured. So the electrolyzer cost, on the right side, there are two tables. The electrolyzer cost, dollar per kilowatt, is expected to come down to about $130 per kilowatt in 2050, which is presently around $770 per kilowatt hour, alkaline electrolyzer. And somewhere in 2030-35 is expected to $225. So the entire capex. So as I mentioned, electrolyzer is only one portion of it, but it requires a whole unit, and that together will cost about 1,000, which can come down to less than 200 by 2050, and the intermediate stage it will be about 350. You can also see because of improvements in technology, this is going to change further, and you will see that efficiency will increase from 65 to 70 and ultimately to reach to about 76%. Therefore, with all these changes that are happening here, the renewable electricity price will reduce from 65, which is there today, which is actually reduced to some 55, 58 in some areas, can reduce to 35, 40, and that come down to as low as 20 by 2050. Now, coming to hydrogen production cost, as I mentioned, it's about $6 to $7 per kg right now. The present gray hydrogen with a gas price of $7.5 per million for 1,000 cubic feet, and this is $10 per 1,000 cubic feet. This comes to 1.7, and this comes to $2 per kg. All figures are $1 per kg. And if we use carbon capture to make it blue, of course, the cost increases to 2.2 and 2.7. And the alkaline green electrolyzer will at $15 per megawatt hour. Here it was 20. I'm assuming $15, a little less. It becomes $2.5 per kg. And if you assume $30 per megawatt hour, then the price of hydrogen can be reduced to about 3.1. So what this slide indicates is that with good improvements in renewable energy and renewable energy being taken up by all the industry and the government giving good amount of incentives to both electrolyzer as well as hydrogen production, there's a possibility that, very high possibility, that the green hydrogen can compete with the gray hydrogen presently, and therefore the industry can adopt it quickly. So this is a very important slide to give you an insight into how the world thinks that renewable energy and green hydrogen prices are going to reduce and could be a competition in future to the present hydrogen. Coming to the last two slides, they are on the 28th slide. It may take a little more time in these two, but I think we have got another 10 minutes. Okay, so if you do see what are the challenges for green hydrogen, one is the high production cost. At this point of time, what are the challenges? So one is green hydrogen is produced using electricity from the renewable energy plant, which would be 2 to 3 times more expensive than gray hydrogen. In addition, adopting green hydrogen for end users can also be expensive. Vehicles with fuel cells and hydrogen tanks cost at least 1.5 to 2 times more than the fossil fuel counterparts. Similarly, synthetic fuels of aviation today, even at the best sites in the world, are up to 8 times more expensive than fossil jet fuel. So this is a big challenge. So we need to do something about the cost of hydrogen. The lack of dedicated infrastructure. Hydrogen has been produced for a long time now with limited dedicated transport infrastructure because we always put the hydrogen plant very close to the place where it is used. So there is no infrastructure for moving hydrogen, or there are no pipelines. There is the whole of the world, there are only about 5,000 kilometers of hydrogen transmission pipeline, compared to more than 3 million kilometers for natural gas only in US and UK. Not in UK, it's in the whole world. There are 470 hydrogen refueling stations around the world, compared to more than 200,000 petrol and diesel refueling stations in US and European Union alone. Natural gas infrastructure could be repurposed for hydrogen, but not all the regions of the world have existing infrastructure. Energy loss. Hydrogen, as I mentioned, is an energy vector. It requires a lot of energy to make it useful as energy source. About 30 to 35% of the energy used to produce energy through electrolysis is lost. In addition, conversion of energy to other carriers can result about 13 to 25% of energy loss. And transporting hydrogen requires additional energy, which are typically about 10 to 12%. Using hydrogen in fuel cells separately, I'm saying, can also add to about 35-45% of energy loss. The total energy loss will depend on the final use of hydrogen. The higher the energy losses, the more renewable electricity capacity is needed to produce green hydrogen. The key issue is whether the annual pace of development in the solar and wind potential will be fast enough to meet the needs for both the electrification of end users and the development of global supply chain in the green hydrogen. And what is the cost that this whole thing will entail? I think that's a big challenge. Lack of value recognition. Greenhouse gas emissions that green hydrogen can deliver. Hydrogen is not even counted in official energy statistics of total final energy consumption. You don't have data of all these things, and there is no internationally recognized ways of differentiating green and gray hydrogen. At the same time, the lack of targets or incentives to promote the use of green products inhibits many of the possible downstream industries and uses for green hydrogen. This limits the demand for green hydrogen. So it's a sort of cycle. Somebody doesn't give you the incentive, therefore you don't do it, and therefore it becomes even worse. Need to ensure sustainability. Electricity can be supplied from a renewable energy plant directly connected to the electrolyzer, or from the grid, or from the mix of the two. Using only electricity from a renewable energy plant ensures the hydrogen is always green in a given moment. But grid-connected electrolyzers can produce for more hours, reducing the cost of hydrogen. When you produce 100% from renewable energy, there are times in the day, in the night time, or in the daytime when you cannot produce that much amount of hydrogen. So if you want a constant supply of hydrogen, you need to take something from the grid. So this is one issue there. Then the enabling policies. The vision document on why hydrogen, roadmap of short-term actions, identifying high priority research areas and applications, national strategy setting levels of ambition and support to industry, creating socio-economic space for green hydrogen, and R&D, workforce, all these things are required, such policies. New policies can create local value chains and encourage demand for green products. Specific measures can level the playing field with fossil fuels. So we need to have some policies, because fossil fuels have got the advantage today. And if you really want to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, you need to have a level playing field. And to that extent, the government has to give some sort of incentives to encourage green hydrogen. Now, let me come to the final summary. We are racing against time. You can have a look at this graph. This is the same graph which I made in the first slide. So the decarbonization process is evolving from one-dimensional, that is renewable or electrification, to a multi-dimensional ecosystem as capital markets, corporates, government expand their sustainability efforts to widen the range of clean technologies that are required to unlock the path of global net zero. Clean hydrogen, as I mentioned, has a role to play in the path of net zero, providing decarbonization solutions, the most challenging parts of the cost curve, which includes long-haul transport, buses, rail, steel, iron and steel companies, chemicals, refining, and so on. From the various emerging technologies, it becomes evident that clean hydrogen is currently at the forefront of this technological challenge, and it has the potential to transform about 15 to 20%, 15% of greenhouse gas emissions and 20% of carbon dioxide emissions in the decarbonization curve. Now, looking back at the curve, this dotted line is what was the 1.5 degree pathway. And the red one is the current trajectory. The fading momentum. Today, what is happening, if we don't do, it will go up to beyond 2.4 degrees centigrade. And current trajectory is around this one, violet line, which will reach about 2.4 degrees. And if you do further acceleration today, it may go down to 1.979 degrees centigrade. And if you do really fast and meet the commitments which have been told by various countries, you can still restrict to about 1.7 degrees centigrade. So that's why I have put this decarbonization efforts is a race against time. So I come to the last slide. And before I can ask any questions, I thought this slide will give you a very, it's a very difficult thing to sort of digest this particular slide because it is not so good for India. Now, this last slide, the left side, there is a chart. And this chart shows GDP per capita increasing from left to right. And what will be the exposure because of climate change if you don't do anything? What will happen in terms of severity, in terms of flooding, in terms of high temperature, in terms of drought, and so on and so forth. So 0 means no exposure, 100 means fully exposed. So obviously all the countries are in this range between, say, 15 to 60 as of today. And what it indicates is, and the size of the circle indicates the population in that country. So obviously India is black and China, which is in blue, are very big circles. And the color indicates what is the severity of effect that's going to happen because of climate change. So you will see here, the lowest risk is blue, light blue color. France, United States, United Kingdom, they don't seem to have any great effect. And the per capita is very high. That's why on the right-hand side. So the per capita reduces, it goes on the left-hand side. And you can say this violet color or blue color, it becomes hotter, much hotter. And the gray color is even more hotter, and black is significantly hotter and more humid. So you'll find that China, being on the much higher latitude, it seems to be having less amount of issues. Whereas India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, which are on the equator, will have a lot of problems going further if what the theory says about climate change, what's going to happen. So this is what, it's a very grim scenario for our country, the way things are. Now, on the right side, there's simple trivia. Although I mentioned in the initial slide, that China is the highest contributor to CO2. And next comes USA, and third comes India. I mentioned some percentage also. I can't remember exactly, some 40% and some 30% and 7% for India. So the per capita greenhouse gas emissions, if you look at the per capita, the highest in tons per year is Qatar, which is 36. It's very, very high. USA is 15. It is not second or third, it's much lower, but I've just written the next few important countries. China is 8, the UK is 5.5, India is 2.1, and there are several countries below India also. So just to give a general broad picture of what is happening in terms of carbon emissions and how it is going to affect the overall global health. Thank you very much for your time, and I thank Madras Chambers for Commerce and Industry to give me this opportunity to talk on this subject. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm glad to answer if I can.
Sundar, can we come to slide 20? I have a question.
First, slide 20. 1 second. Slide 20, hydrogen technologies. Okay. This one?
Yes. Why is this curve? What does that signify? Going up and down?
Exactly. I tried to find out. I am also not. In fact, this is the question that I also had in my mind. Why it is going up and going down? It could have been a straight line. I think they
Right.
wanted to put more circles in that. I think that's all my answers to is
Okay.
on the
Right.
left side.
Thanks. Yeah.
I also tried to find out why it is like this. Yeah. Any more questions?
Yeah, there are some questions in the chat box.
You want to read it, or you want me to read it?
Shall we do that, or would you like to do it yourself? Jaya, can you just read it out for him?
Yeah, if somebody can read it, it will be better. I feel.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah.
I can-
Sanjay Patel is asking if the slides will be shared after the talk.
Yeah, definitely.
Then, okay.
Sorry.
Kalasivan
No,
is
I will
asking-
read it out,
Yeah.
Mr. Saurabh, no problem. Yeah, so one is of course about the thing. See, Sundaram Finance Vishwanathan has two questions. What are the infra and technology interventions in the adaptation of green hydrogen in transportation industry? And how soon do you think hydrogen fuel will pose a threat to EV industry, if at all it will?
As for the light commercial vehicles, I don't think green hydrogen can be a very big competition there. But as far as heavy vehicles are concerned, it can, because it's going to travel for a long distance, about 500 kilometers at one point of time. And therefore, if you have charging stations where you can fill up hydrogen from some source and fill up the whole tank, and then it's possible to use green hydrogen in heavy duty vehicles, but not for light commercial vehicles. Electrical batteries and other things also are being done. And we find today a lot of electrical battery vehicles for two-wheelers and four-wheelers have already come. I don't think it will be able to compete there.
Okay. Hope that answers your question, Mr. Vishwanathan. Mr. Kaliselvan Govindaraj wants to know what is the role of policymakers, industries, and other key players for accelerating the production and usage of green hydrogen.
I had a slide of what are the sort of what are the policy framework in India in terms of what is the central government doing and what is the government of Maharashtra doing. There are three governments which are given some incentives, which is Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu. And the central government has also given some concessions and waivers in terms of open access sourcing for renewable energy. And some states have given land in a very concession price. And there are also concessions for capex if you want to put some green hydrogen plants like electrolyzers and all. So these we'll have to study a little more. But I have collected some data which talks about these three states and the central government having given, and they're also discussing how to encourage on these lines. But it has not really matured into a level where all entrepreneurs can actually start working on that.
Happy that Tamil Nadu is there in the list.
Tamil Nadu is there. Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Venkatachalam wants to know, would there be any cost comparison in terms of rupees per kilocalories for coal, petrol, and H2?
Can I repeat the question once again? I didn't get that.
Mm-hmm.
Repeat the question.
Would there be any cost comparison in terms of rupees, or you want to ask Mr. Venkat, want to explain it?
Yeah, basically I was saying one of the ways of measuring efficiency of a fuel is rupees per kilocalories, the economic efficiency you can call it. Let's say coal is so many rupees per kg and then so many kilocalories per kg. So rupees per kilocalorie is one kind of indicator for. So maybe you can look at the rupees per kilocalorie for the
I will
usual
look at that.
petrol, hydrogen, and coal.
Right. But ultimately, as I mentioned, the calorific value of hydrogen is about 2.5 times. That is about 25,000 to 28,000 kilocalories per kg, vis-a-vis natural gas and petrol, diesel, which is about 10 to 12,000 kilocalories per kg. So obviously, it makes sense to go for hydrogen, it looks cheaper, but the cost of production of hydrogen is much higher. So actually, when you talk of per kg, when you say it is about $6 to $7 per kg today, actually it comes down to $4 if you can really use hydrogen replacing petrol. But that doesn't happen. They require so much more of infrastructure and changes and so many things, and that is why it is not getting competitive as of today. But I'll have to really work out what is the cost
Great.
per kilowatt hour, as you said.
Okay.
And would
Yes.
$1 be achievable as what India is talking about? I mean, just to interrupt.
See, you're talking of hydrogen cost per
That's
kg.
right. Yes.
Yeah,
That's
hydrogen cost is varying between 1.3 to $1.6 per kg today in gray hydrogen, which is abundantly available. And this is costing about $4 to $6. So with all those improvements in technology, we expect that it will come down to 2.5, 2.1, 2.3, somewhere around that.
Okay.
So as of now, I don't think it will come down to less than 1.5, 1.1, unless renewable energy power, which I mentioned as $15 per megawatt hour or $20 per megawatt hour. If it comes down to less than 10, less than 5, then it can come down. Plus scaling up of electrolyzers. That's very important. Today, 10 megawatt, 5 megawatt and all will is too small. We'll have to go to 500,000 megawatt of cell stacks which are required for the electrolyzers.
Thank you. Mr. Sanjay Patel, question is, green hydrogen produced from excess renewable energy makes sense to use where it can be used directly as hydrogen like in industry? Is the case also a slam dunk for long distance transportations, rails, etc. compared to batteries?
No, I
Usage
can't
of
hear.
them- yeah.
I am not able to hear you clearly. Can you repeat this one
Okay,
sentence
or
properly?
Mr. Sanjay Patel, would you like to ask the question yourself? He can unmute you. I think Jaya, you can unmute him. It's a long question. He can better ask it directly.
He can do by himself, ma'am.
Mr. Patel?
Yes, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so the question, I'll just read it what I had written. Green hydrogen produced from excess renewable energy makes sense to use where it can be used directly as hydrogen, like in industry, as you pointed out in your talk. Is the case also a slam dunk, or how competitive a case is it for long distance transportation, rails, etc., compared to batteries? The usage of electrification to make hydrogen and then converting the hydrogen back to electricity makes that efficiency questionable in my mind. I'd like to hear your point of view.
Yeah, as far as rail is concerned, if electrification is there, I don't think green hydrogen can give any competition to it. But as far as heavy duty vehicles are concerned, there is a possibility that green hydrogen cost can reduce. And if there are government mandates, then you can use vehicles designed properly for carrying green hydrogen as fuel and using it as fuel because it has got high calorific value. It can travel many more kilometers than a normal diesel fuel. And that can definitely help. I mean, I don't know. I agree with you that railways cannot be changed from, that's already electrified. The point there is, for railways today, electricity is coming from coal-based thermal power plants. So you need to put a lot of renewable energy to just do that. While you do that, you are not able to get sustained electricity all the time from renewable power. For whatever reason, maybe it is a few days in a year or it could be a few hours in a day. I'm not very sure about that, but it doesn't.
No, but that's where the comparison, whether, in the end, you're going to use electricity.
Correct.
So the question is whether you use that electricity to make hydrogen and then convert that hydrogen back to electricity. In terms of efficiency, would it be better to just store that excess energy as batteries and use when electricity is needed?
So that's what the battery technology also is very difficult because it's very heavy. It requires some special metals, and that's also in short. And therefore, it's not possible to sort of take the battery technology for all aspects of our business. It's very difficult. So there are several pronged attempts have to be made to reduce the CO2, and one particular solution will not fit all the requirements. And therefore, green hydrogen plays its part in this. I agree that you cannot convert electrical back to chemical energy and all. We know it's obviously there'll be some inefficiencies in this whole thing, but this is what it is. If for heavy duty vehicles, definitely it can help, but not for light duty vehicles, not for railways and all, it cannot help. But for example, in industry, even if it is a faraway place and you cannot transport hydrogen, you can make hydrogen someplace, put it in the form of ammonia and take that ammonia to that unit in a liquid form and then sort of fire ammonia itself directly. And that hydrogen in that ammonia is NH3. That hydrogen in that ammonia can give good amount of heat. May not be as good as hydrogen. It can be good.
In fact,
No, but the same argument can be made for solar panels, distributed, and you could convert to battery storage. Anyway, I think the efficiency argument is a strong case against it, but I hear you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question is just now what you are saying. What is the scope of green hydrogen from ammonia? Mr. Murali is asking. What is the feasibility of using concentrated solar panels for renewable power, which can be used for green hydrogen production?
No. Renewable power is essential, not what is required. It is essential for producing green hydrogen. If you don't use renewable power, that cannot be categorized as green power, green energy, green hydrogen. And therefore it can become gray, black, whatever. Okay. So you need to have renewable energy, and that's where it is interlinked to each other. So if you see, if you think that green hydrogen, whatever we are talking today, if it's going to fail in 2040, 50, it's not going to meet the requirement. One of the things could be that we are not able to pace up and scale up the renewable energy plants that are required to be put up all over the world. If you can't do that, green hydrogen cannot come. So they are interlinked.
Thank you, sir. In the interest of time, probably we will stop the Q&A here. Let me invite Mr. Shivaraman, our past president, and as I mentioned, who is the founding president of our Sustainable Chennai Forum, to say a few words and close the session. Shivaraman.
Thank you, Saraswati. Thank you, Mr. Sundarajan, for a fantastic presentation. I have been kind of on the fringe of the green hydrogen business, but I think this 1.5 hour presentation has really given me a complete overview of where we are and where we need to go. I have a million questions, but I think that will probably require a direct or a one-on-one interaction. So I hope to catch up with you at some point. So thank you for spending your time and kind of giving us such a concentrated dose of information on this very critical topic, and I think opened up a lot of minds and a lot of thought processes on what we can do as industry to kind of get to where we need to be by 2050. I think it is not a question of do I want to do renewable energy, or do I want to do green hydrogen, or do I want to do energy efficiency or whatever. I think we have to do everything, and we have to be involved in all possible ways of mitigation of climate change. And hydrogen definitely would be a very, very massive part of it. So thank you once again for taking your time, spending so much of time to prepare a really fantastic PowerPoint presentation. And thanks to the almost 100 people who joined us today. And hopefully, Saraswati, we can have a lot more such programs.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Mr. Sundarajan, on behalf of myself and my team here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.